Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings.
Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio, listener-supported radio, where no topic is taboo, and your support keeps it that way. brought to you by Revolution Radio, listener-supported radio where information never sleeps. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Robert Forman, and we're going to be talking about a recent book he's come out with titled Enlightenment is Not All It's Cracked Up to Be, which I got to tell you, that title kind of caught my eye first time I saw it, and it's being a little unusual, but as you hear the man explain everything, you'll see that it actually does make sense in the end. So, Robert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's a delight to be here. This is our second time, and I so enjoyed our first time that I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I'm actually looking forward to it, too. I thought we really had good karma together on the show we did over there at Talk Now Radio on my site, and that's why I thought the listeners over here would also enjoy hearing a little bit about, what you got going on in your book. Why don't we start off, since the people here are not as familiar with you as I am, with you kind of giving them a little idea what got you interested in writing this book, and maybe perhaps what you hope for people to get out of it.
Very good. Well, let me begin to tell you the story, I suppose. That's probably the best way to do it.
Okay.
The book is something of a memoir, though it's much more than that and quite intentional. My story is an odd one. I started out really struggling when I was in sort of late high school and in college, and struggling with depression and anxiety stuff. And I think a lot of people probably do. But one thing I had going for me was that I was determined to see what I could do to understand and fix this. So I sort of kept at it. I did meditation. I did Zen. I did yoga. I tried psychotherapy, and nothing really seemed to be happening. And then I stumbled into transcendental meditation, which started in 1969. And from the very first meditation, that seemed to really be helping. It was really quite striking. And so I got into it rather rapidly and went off on retreat after retreat. And then I went off on a 9-month meditation retreat back in 1971 and 2. And at that time, I heard a lot about the word enlightenment and illumination, and that life would be so wonderful and perfect in lots of ways, and you'd be ego-free. So I heard all this stuff. But then I had these experiences, or rather a shift that took place in December, January of those years. And the shift was basically that, I'll tell you the story. The shift was that one afternoon I felt this little tube in the back of my head go from being kind of like normal, but, kind of busy, like static in that area, to being dead silent, absolutely silent. And then about 3-4 days later, another tube, just to the right of that tube, became absolutely silent. And when I say became, what I mean is it never went back. Once it became this silence, it never went back. And then after every 2, 3, 4 days, another tube would just go, and then that too would become silent. So for a while, I had this rather strange experience of having a kind of noisy head on one side and true, open, very, very effortless silence on the other side. And little by little, it took probably 3-4 weeks. One tube would shift like that, and then another tube would shift. And finally, the last tube shifted, and I became, in the back of my skull, as it were, in the back of my soul, perhaps, I became truly silent, really wide open, without any sense of boundaries back there. And it was quite an unusual experience and quite interesting, but it hadn't changed my personality. It didn't make me perfect. It didn't make my anxieties go away. I still was struggling in relationships. There was all kinds of trouble I had. So when that happened, I didn't think that it was enlightenment. I really thought this was just some weird experience that had happened to me. And it never occurred to me that this is what they have been talking about. Well, fast forward about 5-10 years, and now I'm in graduate school and reading one Hindu text after the next, one Buddhist text after the next. And I'd read these words about enlightenment, and I'd read words about the Buddha mind, and I'd read words about Christ consciousness. And what I realized was that what these texts were describing was precisely what had happened to me. That I had misunderstood, perhaps we'd been taught wrong, but I had misunderstood, and I thought that this sort of shift of enlightenment was going to make your life perfect, and you were going to be without ego, and you were going to be without struggle, And I thought all that, but what I was reading in these texts was that you would have a sense of who you are inside. It was completely different than what you were on the outside. A sense of silence, a sense of wide openness on the inside, and what you were on the outside wasn't that. It was just sort of like regular life. And so it was my experience that the hype that I had gotten about the nature of enlightenment, the expectations that I had carried about what the spiritual life was supposed to do, all of that was kind of a misunderstanding. That enlightenment is much subtler and spiritual development is much subtler than I had thought. And so the title of the book that you like, Enlightenment Ain't What It's Cracked Up to Be, the title of the book was trying to draw the attention of the reader to the thought that enlightenment has this sort of neon light kind of quality in our minds. But really, it is a shift. It's a worthwhile shift. It's an interesting shift. But it's not the kind of being without ego shift that I think we in the West have come to expect. And so much of my life, Royce, has been spent trying to rethink what enlightenment is, rethink the value of spirituality, and see if I can do a little bit to help bring people's understanding to something a little more realistic, a little more accurate, but also in many ways a little more useful than I think what a lot of us had as we began or as we're sort of involved with spiritual life. And so the title of the book, Enlightenment Ain't What It's Cracked Up to Be, is really designed to say to folks, hey, maybe there's a way to rethink this stuff. And in a way, that's why I wrote the book, because I think that there is a way to rethink the spiritual life. I think it is of deep value, but I don't think it's what people sort of expect.
Right.
And that's kind of what I hope people to get out of it.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me, though, if I'm understanding you correctly, that the initial enlightening process, the chakras opening, though, is an important, necessary step of preparation to make room for knowledge that comes as you continue on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it. I would say that enlightenment, or the experience of this wide openness, has made it possible for me to be more open to others, to really learn how to love, to learn how to be in the world in a way that's not defended, quite so defended. And so, yeah, I think that there is a kind of preparatory nature of this stuff. Being wide open is itself a real gift. But I think where it really pays out is, can I be wide open to you? Can I be wide open to my wife, to my children or grandchildren? Can I be wide open into the world? So that's, I think, where this stuff really pays off. I think that's what really is of value for me in all this.
Or can you be wide open to a pedophile or a rapist down the road, for example?
Yeah, you can be wide open to a pedophile or a rapist. That doesn't mean you have to approve of what they're doing, but you can understand it. I mean, I come across people all the time, and so do you, that you say, boy, this person is really messed up. But at some level, you can also say, I suspect their parents weren't entirely sane, and their parents weren't entirely healthy, and so you can kind of be open. That doesn't mean you have to approve them. It doesn't mean you have to say, yes, go for it. But it does mean that you can understand them as human beings, and you can be a little more loving towards them. Sure.
In other words, you don't look so much necessarily at, well, they're committing rape, they're an evil person, but you more look down the deep side and say, they're a human just like me who's perhaps been misguided into doing what they're doing, and, what they need is correction more than they need persecution, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, or it's like my tendency when I hear a story like that, or see a story like, see something going on like that, my tendency is to say, oh, that's just terrible, and this is just awful. But if we can kind of step back a moment and say, what's going on for this person? What's going on inside of their soul? What's going on inside of their life? I think it's possible to be understanding. That is to say, when I hear a story like that, it's not like I want to say, that's okay what you did, but I can at least see them as a human being, as you put it, and see them as a person with all kinds of trouble in their background and whatnot. Sometimes it's not easy. I have lots of stories of folks that I want to say, I don't know how they got there. This is just too awful. But I can still say, I suspect there's something back there. So yeah, it allows you to be a little more loving, I believe, and the spiritual life invites us to be a little more open to both self and other.
Right. Now, one of the things I wanted to also remind all the listeners of out there is that Talk Now Radio and Revolution Radio, when I say listener supported, we're not able to stay on the air without people either clicking on affiliate links or the books that we may have up in the authors for sale, or, using the donation meter. We don't get money from, say, like big sponsors like Chick-fil-A or, something like that can cover your bills for a whole entire month or keep you on the air for a whole entire month. Because quite frankly, if we went with a big sponsor like that, they could always say, I don't like what you're, putting out to the public. I don't want to be a part of it. Therefore, I'm going to withdraw my business and take it somewhere else. And then you're high and dry trying to pay your bills. So this is why we asked for listener support. And I didn't put that in there a few minutes ago, and so I thought I would go ahead and do it. And the donation meter for Revolution is right over here to the left. Mine's on my side on the front page to the right. Just, let everybody know. Now, back to the topic at hand.
Hang on, before you go on to the topic at hand here, Liz, let me say this, and I want folks that are listening to really recognize this. I know how difficult it is to keep a project like this going, and I think I want to compliment you boys for doing it. I know that there's so much hype in the world and so much sort of superficiality on our radio and TV. And what you're trying to do, as I understand it, Royce, is to engage people in really thoughtful conversations and open people's minds up and really do a serious job of it. So I do want to recommend to folks that are listening here that you support this man and you support what he's doing, because what he's doing is hard. It requires money and it requires support. And I think here's a fellow that really deserves it. So, and let me also tell you that he didn't know I was about to say that, and he sure as hell didn't pay his pay.
No, actually, I didn't. But I do appreciate that, however, though. It's always nice to have support, from guests and listeners alike. It kind of encourages you to make the effort because, a lot of people out there listening are not aware that, well, in my particular case, I run a one-man show, and I do all the looking for the guests, all the background checks on the guests, the posting them to my site, the promoting them, the scheduling them, the editing them, putting them in the archives, turning them into videos, and it can get to be a pretty big full-time job for one person to handle by himself when you're doing 3 shows a week. So, there's a lot more involved than I think a lot of people realize, and, you don't blame them. They're out there, they're listening. How could they possibly know what all goes into it without having some experience?
Right.
So.
And it does take a lot. So again, I want to encourage people to support this good fellow.
Now, what I was going to come back to here for a minute was, you're talking about the ability to be open to others, even the people that most people wouldn't be open to. I think that's a little bit more what the world needs. You got so many people, and in all honesty, I think a lot of it, it says something negative for the church, but the true matter is church teaching does contribute to it, whether it sounds negative or not. The church has a tendency to want to excommunicate and shut out people that does certain things, for example, rather than try to open the door to these. Now, you got a few churches that, will make at least a semi-effort to open up to these people, but for the most part, they're so worried about sin that they can't, look beyond to the deeper needs, in other words.
Yeah, I think, as I listen to you, I think that there are definitely many churches that do that. I think, as I think about it, some churches are very open-minded, and even to a fault, like the Unitarian Universalist Church is extremely open-minded and will accept pretty much anybody that walks in the door. But I think the tradition of many churches in the States and in the world is to be pretty caught up in their own approach to things, pretty caught up to make sure that they have their truths pretty well defined. And if somebody crosses that line, I think historically, if somebody crosses that line, people have been pretty upset with that. And I think that the challenge of us as grown-ups, as we engage with their lives more and more deeply and more openly, our challenge is that we can recognize the value of having certain positions and certain principles. And I think that's important, and it helps keep people coherent and helps keep people sort of oriented towards a particular direction. But at the same time, to also be open and also be recognizing that there are other approaches and there are other ways of being. So I think that's a value to recognize that there is importance to having things that hold us together. There is importance to having real principles that you really need. But I think also a healthy way to hold them is to hold them and say, yes, this I believe, but if you believe that, that doesn't make you evil. It makes you different. And I think that's important for us to realize. So that as we develop the spiritual life, I do hope that people develop this ability to be both deep in what they themselves are, deep in their own belief systems, but also open to others. And I think that's part of the message of Enlightenment and what it's cracked up to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree with you. I really do. I mean, on one hand, for example, it's very important to have this view of be dogmatic in the fact that the golden rule is a good thing to follow. You always want to treat others like you'd have others treat you. Great. That's fantastic. You want to be dogmatic about it. But then when it comes to something totally unimportant, I don't know, give an example, whether women wear tops down to the beach or not or whatever. I'm just taking anything out of the deal. Why are we being dogmatic and, well, we don't want you in our church. Look what you do on the beach. I mean, it kind of defeats the spiritual purpose of teaching people, you know, to be more open and more loving in their hearts like the other one would have done, in other words.
Yeah, and I think one of the lessons I've gotten in the last 10, 15 years is that phrase of yours, to really be open in your heart. I think that's of such deep value. I can't stress that enough. That I have learned, and I think the spiritual life helps this, learn to be a much more loving individual, much more really open to the world and open to other people, and really learn how to create what I would call intimacy or soul contact, soul-to-soul contact. And I think if a religious system is worth its salt, and most are, I would say that to help people become truly open, truly intimate with other people, I think there's a real value. So if I'm really open to another person, and she, to use your example, and she decides she wants to go topless on the beach, which French women do, by the way, you know, I want to say she's just a human being, and she's doing it in her way, and that's what she chooses to do. And I might not buy it. I might not agree with it. But that doesn't mean that I can't really recognize this as a human being with their own values and their own way of thinking about things. And I think that, yeah, if a religious system works, it'll make us more open to people who are both similar and also different.
I had heard that the French had different, say, values or laws regarding those particular issues, but I've never been to France to actually know for sure. But
well,
you know,
they might be. All I can tell you is when I was in France, I would go to certain beaches, and I can't. My experience wasn't wide enough that I could say all beaches. But I'd go to certain beaches, and there were lots of topless women, some that were topless and some that weren't. It seemed to be pretty comfortable. And, you know, as a guy, I thought that was cool. I really enjoyed that. But I also think some of the women thought it was appropriate, and some of the women in my group, we were all Americans, some of the women in my group thought this was not okay. You know, but I think it wasn't a huge deal, and it wasn't highly sexualized. It was just part of the nice scene about a French beach. So, yeah, I think it does happen. Also, I go to Sweden a fair amount, and when it's a warm day, some of the women there are topless, and I think that's just lovely. I really do think it's just lovely.
Well, I personally think that if it's a hot day out there, and those guys want to take our tops off, then why shouldn't the women be allowed to also? I mean, that's kind of a double standard.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
I mean, you know, who doesn't want to be comfortable is the bottom line moral. And, you know, from what I look at is, on one hand, and like you say, not all religions are this way, but talking about some of your more dogmatic religions, for me, the dogma tends to worry more about the materialistic side and less about the spiritual side. And it's actually the spiritual house that you need to be more concerned with than the material house. The material house you leave behind you when you go anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think, you know, there are many religions in America that talk about, you know, being less oriented towards wealth and less oriented towards selfishness. But I don't think that really is what gets communicated in many a tradition. You see many traditions that talk about that stuff, and yet people sort of are very proud of their Cadillacs as they drive up, or their SUVs as they drive up. And so I think that some religions are communicating that a little more powerfully than others. But that's not for me to say, because that's not my tradition. I'm not a Christian. I was born and raised Jewish. And then I become a meditator, and that comes from the Hindu tradition. So it's not for me to say what's appropriate for a Christian tradition. I recognize it's not my world. But I think it is appropriate for me and you to say, if a religion opens you up to other human beings, that's a value I want to affirm. If it opens you up to people who are similar and different than you, that's a value that I want to affirm.
Kind of like opens you up to the live and let live standard?
Sure. It opens you up in that way. Frankly, and you're sort of hinting around it, but I'll just say it. When I see religious traditions that are so adamantly opposed to those people over there getting married to somebody different than I would want them to marry. In other words, this fellow over there shouldn't marry that fellow over there, even though it's not my life. Honestly, I've never understood that. I've never understood how that is really a religious value that people can get behind. Because if a religion is worth its salt, it allows you to open up to other human beings in their similarities and their differences. And I just don't see it. I don't see how we can say, as any tradition, we can say, I'm sorry, my tradition says you may not do that, even though you're not in the tradition. I just don't get that. And it always has appalled me.
Well, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I'm a good case. My dad, God rest his soul, when I was growing up, was a fairly good father. I mean, he wasn't perfect, but, the man did his best, and I'll give it to him. 2 weeks before he died, we were talking on the phone, and he had just recently married a woman whose son was a preacher, and my dad was a preacher as well. And he couldn't stop telling me about how her son was a son he never had, because he was disappointed in me for not preaching. So he could, I took that like I'm being disowned because I didn't preach, in other words. But, having said that, at the same time, my uncle was an atheist, and he's the one that always taught me to live and let live, leave a place cleaner than what you found it, and things like that my father never taught me because he was too busy teaching me about the dogmatic stuff, in other words. I find it interesting that a atheist who's not professing to be spiritually enlightened has a more spiritual value than a Christian who is professing it, in other words.
Yeah, it breaks your heart, doesn't it? Because it's like religious traditions, here I am a scholar of religion, and I recognize that religious traditions are unbelievably valuable in helping people get oriented, helping people find meaning, helping people live their lives in a healthy way. And so when I see a tradition that gets so preoccupied with fairly narrow concerns, if you wear a bonnet, are the straps long or short? If you wear a beard, is it long or short? Can you use, you can use electricity, but you can't push a button. I mean, I see traditions get quite preoccupied with these very minutiae kind of concerns, and I'd say, I think that we're missing something here. I think what we're missing is the ability to help people truly open up to others and learn to apply spiritual principles in a wider and wider range of things. So Enlightenment ain't what it's cracked up to be. The book we're talking about teaches that it is conceivable or it's necessary to apply the principles of the spiritual life to everything that we do, to become more open to relationships, more open to one another, more open in our teamwork, more open to ourselves. And I think that's the value that I would hope that religions would communicate. So when I see a religion is quite preoccupied with its own concerns about what seems to be fairly minutiae issues, I want to say you're kind of missing the point here. The point is to help people become truly open and truly free and truly loving. And I think that's the value that I want to look for.
Okay, listeners, I want to remind y'all once again, which I put it in the chat room, but I don't think I mentioned it live on the air. You can learn more about Robert and his book at enlightenmentaint.com. And he's also got another website, and that was sojazzy.com, or was it .org?
Let me say that. The website there is called Soul Jazz Online. That's all one word, .com. So it's souljazz.online.com. And that's, that is the second website I'd like people to go to.
I'm glad you corrected that because I was sure mutilating it. I do apologize for that. I haven't read off that thing since the last time you were on my show, so it just didn't get deep set in my mind yet.
Yeah.
You know how it is when you don't use it every day.
Absolutely. So I know it pretty well at this point.
But
I must say, when I go to the site enough that when I type in the site, my computer finishes it off for me, so I really don't have to know what it says. But nevertheless, it's all jazz online.
Yeah, I like the way the address bar fills things in, but sometimes it can fill it in with other sites you've been to with similar names just as often, and then you got a whole list to go through, and it gets to be a pain. So the book don't just talk about, for instance, the things that you don't experience or exactly how you did experience it, but it also goes into detail about things that are good spiritual material, like a learning process of sorts, so to speak.
Oh, very much. And the whole book is oriented around the question of what is the real value of the spiritual life. If it does not bring about, if it doesn't make you happy necessarily, if it doesn't make you, if you continue to have, say, anxieties, as I have off and on over the years, if you continue to have difficulties with your life in a way that you might not be anticipating, what is the value of this stuff? And I think it does have a real value, but it's not as involved as I was thinking. It's not as simple as I was thinking. And so it takes it took me a while to figure out, and part of the process of writing the book was figuring out what is the value of all this stuff. So I could read you a little section of it that I sort of begin to answer the question, but I do want to just say that the critical matter for me is that if we continue the process of opening up and continue the process of discovering who we are and what we're about. And I think enlightenment ain't what it's cracked up to be, is really a study in how to be attentive to the real value of something like enlightenment and how to discover for oneself what the value of this stuff is.
So since you have been enlightened and these chakras have been opened, has your enlightenment, I guess, morphed into anything new or more pronounced?
Yes. And the book, Enlightenment Ain't What It's Cracked Up to Be, describes that. And so I can give you a couple of things. The way it developed for me was this sense of silence started out literally in the back of my head when I described those tubes that kind of shifted one after the next after the next. That was kind of in the back of my head, in the back of my neck. I sometimes think they were probably neural pathways going down into the spine. What's called the rudimentary brain, or I want to say, I keep thinking alligator brain.
I was thinking pineal gland.
Yeah, but the sort of most elementary part of the brain. But that's where it began. And after about 5-10 years, I realized that sense of silence had, as it were, spread out. So that, like if you're wearing a baseball cap on the back of your head, it had taken up an area like that. In other words, it was sort of towards the rear, but now the sense of silence and openness had now expanded. So it took up the whole back of my head. And fast forward another 5-10 years, and now it takes up the whole of my head. And the sense of silence is now really spread out around my head and ultimately around my body. And then after another few years, that sense of silence had, as it were, opened up past my body. So I could sense something like an aura. So it extended out first a few inches and then maybe a foot or two. And then eventually it spread out so that it sort of contacted the world. And then I had an experience in 1996. That was the beginning of that phase. And that this too became permanent, where the sense of silence now took up not only me, but seemed to extend out into the world. So that when I look at a tree out there, I'm looking at a beech tree out my window right now. And as I look at that tree, there's a sense that the silence that is me also is somehow runs within the tree. So that there's a sense of what many religious traditions call unity, or unity consciousness. And that sense of unity became permanent in 96, and then that too has gotten, I would say, more and more obvious over the years, stronger perhaps. So yes, I think that original stuff of finding the silence inside has come to be really a sense of what I look at and what I am. There's no distance between those two things. I'm looking at a tree, a beech tree right now. I'd say it's probably about 60, 70 feet from me. But I would also say that inside it feels like it's right here in my chest. And so there's a sense of no distance, a sense of no otherness that I didn't used to feel, that I think has become increasingly dominant.
Kind of like the interconnectedness with everything.
Yeah, and that becomes, as it were, sensory. You know, it's not just a thought. Oh, I can imagine them interconnected. It's not just a sort of nice word that I've heard from my teachers, but rather it's like, I look outside and I know that there's a sense of oneness between me and that tree, and oneness between me and my car out in the driveway, and oneness between me and you. And so, that has become increasingly dominant, and I like it. It's a real, I was going to say pleasant, that doesn't quite catch it, but there's something very charming about all this, and it's increasingly appealing, I would say. So it has changed.
Yeah, I hear from people more and more and more all the time that have been enlightened, or they feel like they've been enlightened, and it's always the same story. They always begin to feel more like a whole than they do an individual, kind of like, rather than like the single drop of water, they begin to blend with the whole ocean.
Yeah, I would say, I've heard a lot of people say that. And all I would say is that I have no ability to perceive the whole ocean. That's, as I sort of jokingly say, that's higher than my pay grade. You know, I'm not able to see the whole ocean. What I can say, though, is there's an ocean around me, and I sense it. And I do not sense its limit. I don't sense its end. But I can say I feel very much a part of this stuff, and this stuff feels very much a part of me. And so I can say that sense of the ocean is what I swim in. But I think there's probably very few fishes that can look around and say, oh, the ocean goes that far, or it doesn't end here. I think there's very few fishes that can say, I know what the whole is. And that's kind of where I am. I don't know what the whole is. I know a lot of teachers have don't know where the whole is, and a lot of people have taught what you're describing, which is like we're part of this whole, and the whole is somehow, we're all interconnected. And I say, I wish I knew how they knew that. I don't know that, but I can say that it makes sense to me.
Okay. I want to remind everybody that Studio A is the studio you're listening to, and the number here to call in is 347-688-2902. Feel free to call in and ask the guest, or even me if you want to, any questions or make any comments, offer some feedback. Perhaps you've had an experience yourself that you'd like to share. I'm pretty sure my guests would love to hear about it, wouldn't you?
Sure. I'm always interested. I like people telling their stories.
Okay. Now, one of the things I wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about before I forget is your plans as far as other books. Have you actually written any other books than this one, or are you going to be working on that pretty soon?
I am in the process of writing 2 books, actually. One of them is called Soul Jazz, which is about the program that I run, and the other one is I don't have a final title for it, but it's something to the effect of how to retire. In other words, how to, a lot of people, myself included, are now facing into the, oh my God, what do I do now after you finish your job or you finish working? And I think how to retire is a heck of a question that we really need to be thinking about. So I'm doing that. And what I'm thinking about for that book is that I'm writing it. I have this very nice way to write that I've sort of discovered and I'm really loving, which is I go for a hike. I enjoy hiking. So I'll hike for about an hour and a half. And that's about as far as I can go in one single crack. And so then I sit down and I take out my pad, and I'll write for an hour, hour and a half, and then I put the pad back in my pack, and I go on, and I have another hour and a half, and then I sit down and write, and I'll get maybe 3 writing sessions in a day. And so the reflections on retirement is also a reflection on what it is to be out in the world, and what it is to be hiking, and what it is to be in nature. Because I think if we're to learn about the true easy quality that we can have as we engage with our retirement years, I think it's very parallel to the ease that we can find in nature and the openness we can find in the streams and in the rocks and in the trees around us. So I think that what I'm attempting to do there is to kind of reflect both on what it is to be in the world physically, but also what it is to be in the world emotionally, without having the kind of load that we place on things, that we have placed on things in most of our working years and our parenting years. That makes sense to you, Rose?
Yeah, I think so. But, retirement is something that's like the rest of life. It's unique to each individual.
Yeah, of course. But a lot of people have come to me, actually, and said, it's like I feel like I'm not much of a... Well, I'm not... Or as one friend of mine put it, he said, I used to be somebody, and now I'm struggling with the fact that I'm not somebody. What he means by that is, I used to be important. This guy worked for the mayor of his town, and he was a recognized figure, and now he's no longer working for the mayor of the town. He's no longer has a place in society like that. He no longer feels important. He no longer feels like he's contributing. Like, okay, how do you deal with that? That's no small matter, And I used to be a professor, and I used to be, the editor of a journal, and now I'm neither of those things. So it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you confront this lack of definition and the social lack of kind of recognition that you have to as you retire? So I'm thinking about that question. But I'm also thinking about the soul jazz questions, and we can talk about that, because that's also near and dear to my heart.
Okay. Now, while you were telling us all of that, I've been busy multitasking over here, and I put both your EnlightenmentInc.com and SoulJazzOnline.com into the chat room for everybody to be able to go to your website. So y'all make sure y'all click on that and check out both his sites.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you do any kind of workshops or, work with people one-on-one or anything like that?
Near and dear to my heart, my friend. Yes. I do. The Soul Jazz is an online workshop. And, in fact, there's one starting towards the end of May that we're almost ready to roll with. We have a bunch of people signed up for that. And I fully expect some more. You can find out about that and the information on what that will be about at souljazzonline.com. It's pretty obvious how to click on, the next course. The work I do one-on-one is very sweet, and I work with people in helping them apply the principles of their spiritual life to their everyday life. Bring about the values of openness and aliveness into their everyday relationships. And it's something that I think I seem to have some talent for. I call myself a soul jazz counselor or a soul counselor. And people seem to be really profiting from it. In fact, before I talked to you, I just got off the phone with one of my clients, and I am so pleased to see her and people like her. I've got a number of clients, but I'm so pleased to see her really moving into a much more alive position. She's been so restricted and so restrained, and I'm witnessing this person really sort of discover who she is out loud in conversation and start to let go of some of the rules that she grew up with. And I think that's been just beautiful to be a part of. So, yeah, I see people doing that. I try to help people become more open in their relationships and apply the principles of spirituality to their everyday lives. And I'm pleased to say it seems to be working well. So, yeah, if somebody sent me a letter on EnlightenmentInc.com, there's a contact form there. If somebody sent me a letter on SoulJazzOnline.com, there's a contact form there. Yes, I'd love to work with people, and it's something I seem to be pretty good at. So thanks for asking. That's good.
So does any of your work, say, help people with things like depression and anxiety? And because you and me both know that, working with your spirit will tend to, help those kind of things diminish, in other words.
Yes. I would say that we do, in the Soul Dress program, we work quite a bit with anxiety. Because I take anxiety to be a kind of pointer, or a kind of gateway. And what I mean by that is, if I'm saying something to you that I've never said before, that I've never really allowed myself to recognize before, I'm talking to you about something that's really new in my life. One of the things that happens is, before you come out with it, you tend to feel anxious, because you've never said this before. It makes you feel a little vulnerable to be that open to somebody. And I think that to be able to say, this is what's really true for me, causes people to feel a little anxiety. And that anxiety is something that I think we can really use. So the phrase we use is that we invite people to lean into their anxiety. Now, if you feel a kind of what I would call a neurotic anxiety, it's like everything makes me anxious, that's a different kind of matter. That's just a kind of, as it were, a kind of fear of the world, fear of running into the world. But what I'm pointing to is the anxiety that comes about as you're engaging with the world in new and fresh ways. And we invite people to be thinking about that and using that kind of anxiety when it comes up for their own growth and process of expansion. Can it help with anxiety? Can Soul Dress help with anxiety? Absolutely. Because when we're anxious about something, there's a secret in there that we tend to not want to say to ourselves. And what the Soul Dress program invites is we invite people to talk to each other, to talk to their friends and loved ones about the stuff that is kind of holding them back. So yeah, I think it definitely helps with anxiety. In fact, the client I just got off the phone with was describing how she always used to be anxious about revealing too much or revealing anything about herself. And so we have encouraged her, and she and I have been working quite a bit to help her become freer in herself so that she can be able to be engaging with the world in new and fresh ways, even though it makes her anxious sometimes to do so. And she's loving it. So, yeah, it's the kind of thing I really enjoy doing with her.
Yeah, you and me, we've talked about people with anxiety, people that's worried about revealing too much of themselves, people that reveal more of themselves than what other people would prefer that they reveal to themselves.
Right.
And people who don't like it when people reveal too much or too little of themselves. But, I mean, to me, every last bit of what we're talking about here has its origins really in the childhood, because a lot of people don't stop and think that the unit they are now is not their own soul doing on their own. It's a conglomeration of their parents raising, things they heard in church, values that were, forced down on them. Some of them they just come to agree with, whether they really agreed or not, for, fear of punishment or rejection or whatever, and then they forgot why they did it and they think it's their idea now. But I think in a lot of cases that if you're going to be able to open up and get any good out of spiritual teachings from any book, aren't you going to have to kind of go back to the beginning and start trying to understand yourself and know yourself a little better and why you have these nervous anxieties for these things?
Absolutely. And I think that as you're talking, Rose, I feel myself really saddened, because I think it is part of the human challenge, and especially in our culture, it's part of the human challenge to kind of be brought up with these anxieties, that you have to be a certain way, you have to feel certain things that your parents assume you're going to feel, you have to act a certain way, you have to sort of be successful or be aggressive in some cultures, or be whatever it is, be feminine if you're female. And that may or may not be who we are. And I think that we all grow up with these shoulds and oughts. And that makes me sad to think that people are so caught in that stuff. And what I think the challenge of life is to, or better still, the challenge of the spiritual life is to grow up in such a way that you can continue to ask yourself, really, do I really feel this? Is this something I want to continue with? And I think what the souljazzonline.com website is pointing to is it's pointing to the challenge of starting to tell the real truth that drives us in this way. So often you're right, the real truth has to do with who we were as kids and the pressures our parents put on us. Sometimes I'm thinking of one guy I know that the issue for him was his sister, and always feeling like his sister got more of the family love than he did, and that's an issue he's going to deal with. Other people have this sense that they'll only be lovable if they're famous. And it makes this such a human trial. It's such a human challenge. And it makes me sad to know that people are really struggling with this stuff and still struggling with this stuff.
But in a society, they have no choice, might near have no choice but to struggle with it, because coming out freely comes with a price. Yes. Well, coming out freely doesn't mean you have to break all the rules, in the faith of your parents, but it does mean you have to know what you're doing in terms of consciousness. So in that sense, I think it does require that we really kind of open ourselves up in ways that we probably couldn't when we were kids. So, yeah, I think it does relate back to what we were as kids, all kinds of stuff. Does. I know I do. Well, I know for me personally, I have this thing about me that I don't want anybody to like me unless they like the real, honest me, nothing hidden, nothing else. And, wanting to be that open with people and take me or leave me, that's the kind of thing that kind of comes with a price depending on what the real you is, in other words. Because if the real you enjoys doing things that other people, for whatever reason, have been taught it was wrong or morally frowned upon or whatever, people are going to be vocal about it, in other words. Yeah. And I think that I completely agree with you. What I want is I want people that I call my friends to know who I actually am. But that's kind of the phrase, an asymptote in mathematics? What? An asymptote is a line that is getting closer and closer and closer to a circle, but never quite intersects with the circle. And I think that saying to somebody or saying to myself, I want the world to know the real me, is a kind of an asymptote. That is to say, I don't know the real me. I get closer and closer and closer to it, and I invite my friends to get closer and closer to it. But I don't think I ever find it, and I don't think my friends will ever find it. So my challenge is, can I continue to explore out loud about what I actually feel, what I actually think? And that it is the challenge of becoming a grown-up, or a complete being, as it were, that we can invite people, and invite ourselves, which is the hard one, invite ourselves to keep becoming more open, to keep discovering out loud what we feel and think. But I think that sense of inviting people into the real me is very much something I want to work at. But it's not something I think I'll ever quite achieve. Well, I'd like to think I achieved it, but I'm not 100% sure. But I do know that, from my point of view, if you like a me that I project to suit you, do the things you want me to do, don't do the things you don't want me to do, well, then you like that projection. You don't like me. This is why it's important to me that they like the real me, because well, who needs to be their projection liked and not themselves, in other words. Right. I completely understand what you're pointing to, and I completely agree. That is to say, I want people to know, to know the real me, to the extent that I know it, to the extent that I can live it. But you made an interesting point too, Robert, and that is oftentimes we don't. I said you made an interesting point too, though. Sometimes we don't even know ourselves. Most of the times we don't even know ourselves. I don't think I ever completely know myself. So in that sense, this is a learning process. And I think what we want to invite each other into is, that we want to invite each other into helping each other discover who we really are and learning together who we really are. So, I love what we're talking about here. This is really the fun part, because it's in the discovery process that I want to say real life. Yeah, and I think life's all about discovery. And I know that me personally, when I was a kid, I had a very vile temper. My dad used to tell me that if I didn't curb my temper, I was either somebody was going to injure me, or I was going to injure them, or I was going to injure myself. And the minute he said I was going to do it to myself, I thought this man was stark raving mad. Do I look like some kind of loony bin that's going to just go out and, blow my own brains out or something, Little did I know, though, when I was in my 30s, I was going to be in a big fit of rage. And during this fit of rage, I was going to slam my arm through a window and maim it for the rest of my life. Oh, you're kidding. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, you okay? But I'm saying it's a classic example of how little we can honestly know ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, for me, one of the issues has been, that I always wanted to be successful. And at certain points I look at myself and say, I'm being very successful. But, that's one of those words that kind of drives us all a little crazy, that why was I so driven for, quote, success? What is there about that I thought? And beneath the word success for me was, oh, my parents will really love me if I'm successful. And beneath that is, oh, I'll really love me if I'm successful. And beneath that is, get something else and something else and something else. And so I think it's in this sense that I think life becoming mature is a process of discovery and a process of learning, and especially learning out loud together who we are, how we're coming across, what our effect on other people is. And, Lord bless the people that are on this path together. And honest to goodness words, I really feel for people that are so resistant to growth and self-reflection that they don't take their lives as a kind of process of growth and discovery and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, you see people that are stagnating like that, you got to kind of reach out and feel for them, because the rest of their life, it's a pretty dreadful life. It's a life full of misery, pretty much, because they're not going to be able to graduate and come up above the things that are tormenting them so much, in other words.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing that it's 1:56, so I know that's fixing to happen right there. And, folks, that's our break time music, and I called it right to the T. We'll be back as soon as the break is over. Y'all be good and don't go away.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, I'm Benjamin.
And I'm Jasmine.
We are inner tour guides with black belts in the art of self-awareness and how to live a passionate life.
We love talking with you about what you have and what you want.
More importantly, we want to explore with you how to bridge the gap between that wanting and bring it right back to the having.
So what are your hopes, dreams, and desires?
Is it money, love, success, health, wealth, or something even more specific?
Let us guide you through the exciting adventure of turning what you want into what you have.
Come join in the conversation on our show, The Inner Revolution.
We look forward to exploring with you.
Hey, Truther Junkies, it's me, Angela Black, and I'm back. Join me every weekday except for Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, Studio B on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com for my news show, At This Moment 2014. See you there.
The finder of lost children and missing persons. Monique Lassan. Surveillance, civil and criminal investigations. I investigate.
No, I am the chosen one.
Do not underestimate the power of good, and do not dismiss the strength of the child.
Yes, every Wednesday evening on Revolution Radio, come join our very own I-Investigatrix, Monique Lassan, with her private I-X-Files.
So you're the finder of lost children?
Private I-X-Files, every Wednesday from 10 to midnight Eastern, Studio B, on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
I realize it's very hard for you to take in. But is your destiny to find the golden child?
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Hey folks, Captain Nighthawk here. Do you have a favorite host? Well, imagine if you will having all the broadcast shows from 2013 to listen to anytime you want. Awesome deal, huh? Anyway, so stop by freedomslips.com and order the entire 2013 library of your favorite host for just $30. Not only do you help with the station funding to keep us on the air, you also help the host because they get half of the net on every order. Also, we have Revolution Radio's all-time favorite shows all on one disc. The details are really broad, so you'll have to visit the website and go look at the details yourself. It's, again, www.freedomslips.com/season2013.htm. And get your favorites. First come, first serve, 7 to 21 days for delivery. Thank you. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps, including me. Later.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
He wants a challenge. Let's give him one.
The voice that whispers in your ears are the screams that you fear. The mind you cannot defy is the heart that rules mankind. The people who made you are the gods that will save you. I am Steve Travesty. I am the voice. The ghost in the machine. Ghost in the Machine. Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Studio A.
Right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everybody. Once again, this is Talk Now Radio, Listen now to Talk Now, where no topic is taboo. Listener-supported radio, brought to you by Revolution Radio, where information never. Listener-supported radio, where information never sleeps, although the hosts do. Folks, I did a little tongue-tied on that one, and I just had to throw the host in for good measure. I don't know what made me get tongue-tied, but I sure done it. Back to our topic at hand. I got to tell you, Robert, I was wanting to talk to you a little more about your soul jazz, but I wanted to complete the hour before we got on it because, I did be like separating the two subjects, in other words, keeping it, organized. So we're back from break time. Why don't we move on to Soul Jazz Online, and especially since you got a book about it, why don't you tell us a little something about that book?
Well, the book is really about the program itself, or what we've been learning. And I think that the trick of soul jazz, or the insight that leads to soul jazz, is this. A lot of people have had moments in which they're talking to somebody, and all of a sudden the conversation kind of drops down. And you're talking about things you didn't know you thought. You're talking about things that you're sort of learning in the moment. You're talking about feelings that you have or thoughts that you have that you really didn't know you had. And that's, I think, a very common experience where people are sort of discovering sharing really deeply with one another. And, I'll use the word intimacy for that, though I don't mean sexual intimacy. And the Soul Jazz program says, becoming that close and that open with other human beings is actually possible if we know a few key ideas or a few key tricks. And I would think one of the key tricks is that we, intentionally or not, make ourselves a little vulnerable. We start sharing about things that we are learning, or start sharing about things that make us feel a little exposed or vulnerable. And in becoming more open with other human beings, we become so much more natural and so much more alive in that conversation. And I think the challenge of becoming whole, the challenge of really growing up, is the challenge of becoming able to share with another person this kind of thinking or these kinds of thoughts.
Kind of like the birthing through you. Yeah, birthing something through you so that you become increasingly open to another human being. And the key in all of that is allowing yourself to become a little more vulnerable. And we talked about that in the last hour. We talked about the sort of anxiety that comes up when you make yourself a little vulnerable. And so we talk a lot about that anxiety and what people often do with it and how we run from it, but also how we can use it when it comes up. You start sharing this with somebody and you go, oh, goodness, I don't know quite if I want to let them know this, but that is itself a marker that we're really getting onto something real and something alive for ourselves and for the other. So Soul Jazz uses that. And we call it Soul Jazz because if you can touch into that stuff that is more deeply true than usual for you, almost always the other person will start touching into things that are a little more open than usual for them, too. So there's a kind of teaching each other or swapping. There's a kind of improvisational quality to sharing with you what I don't yet understand, and then you'll tend to share back with me and back to me, and back and forth it goes, and little by little there's a kind of a play that goes on, a kind of jazz-like quality to being able to share at that level with other people. So that's what we call Soul Jazz. Now, also, there's the fact that once you have shared with everybody, and it does take a lot of courage, but once you've done it and everything's been opened up, nobody has any ammunition left to come after you with because it's all been shot.
Yeah, once you've really told the truth, people can't come after you because the truth is already out. They can never come after you when they keep it somewhere. So, yeah.
I mean, sure, you got some people that will want to continually preach that you depending on exactly what it is you're keeping in, that it could be simple. You need to go to church. You need to pray for forgiveness. But in all honesty, it's been my experience that these people are in the minority, not the majority. And even if they continue to do it, it just doesn't have the same impact it did when you were hiding it.
Yeah, right. And I think that's very good, Bruce. And I think that there's a lot of people who want to preach on this, but most people want to go to some level of deeper truth. Most people want to share what's really going on for themselves. We have to be careful. You can't share it with people that are going to do you harm. You can't share it with people that are going to turn around and tell your best friend what you said. But rather, most people are respectful of that. So if we share with people that are trustworthy, I think the power of telling the real truth to another human being is enormous, and it just allows us to become increasingly free and open. And that's what I'm after. I want a life in which I can always be open and always be, let me amend that. It's not that I want to always be open, but I want to be conscious of how open I choose to be here. I want to make my choices consciously, and I want to make my choices towards openness with all of my heart and all of my intentionality. So it's not the case I always want to be open. Sometimes it is inappropriate. But when it's appropriate, then I always want to be able to go there.
Yeah, but I tell you something, Robert. For my money, once a person can get to a point that they can pick and choose like that, they become a little bit less of a slave to other people's opinions. And, because right now, if going back to the topless lady example, if she was to go to a church setting, for example, she'd feel uncomfortable about admitting she went to the beach topless. However, while she's feeling uncomfortable, she's hiding it and keeping it to herself. She's also, whether she realizes it or not, enslaving herself to their opinion and their idea, their standard of what they have already set for her in her life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she is. But she may choose not to fight that battle, and that's her choice.
Right.
In other words, sometimes it feels like it's going to be productive to take a stand like that. But sometimes it's going to be, it's not going to go anywhere. People are going to get nasty with you. Sometimes you can choose completely intelligently and completely appropriately. I don't want to go there with this guy. This is
a strategic retreat.
Yeah, in fact, it's a strategic retreat. So sometimes I want to say, this is not a battle I choose to fight right now. And that's okay. I want to say to people, I want them to be conscious and intentional. This is a battle I want to fight right now. I do want to be open with this person. Or, conversely, I don't trust this person enough to be open, and I don't want to go there with this person. I don't feel like it'd be productive.
Well, this is a pretty long walk we're talking about, especially when in life you encounter many, many, many people, and you have to kind of redo old ground with new people.
Yeah, it's true. But I am always interested in going more deeply with people. And if they give me signals that they're interested in going more deeply with me, by God, I'll accept those signals, and I'll see if I can't reciprocate with them. So that there's a kind of swapping of energy here. There's a sort of, people give me signals that they are interested in going deeper with me, and I always want to be able to play with those people. So that the friends that I have that I consider dear friends are people that I can count on being able to go increasingly deeper with. And that's what I'm after. I'm after a life and a world in which I can do that with virtually everybody. And so that the work that I do on the Soul Jazz program is really quite selfish. That is to say, I want to live in a world in which people are willing to talk about what's really, really true for them. And I want to be able to share what's really, really true for me, that it's appropriate, with virtually everybody I meet. And so that I do the Soul Jazz work so that I can help people find that, but also so I can make the world I want to make it. And I think that seems like a win-win-win to me. Making my world better, making their world better, and making the world a better place to live in. So,
my favorite situation, win-win.
Me too. Yeah.
Can't go wrong when everybody wins.
That's right. But for me, it's win-win-win. I have a friend named Doug who calls it triple win. I win, you win, and the world wins. So that's what I'm after. I'm after making a better world, so you and I and the world are all better off because of it. Yeah. And who loses in a situation like that?
And of course, by doing this here, being open with more and more people, it's kind of like garnishing more and more freedom.
Yes. And that's a nice way to put it, Royce. That is, to become open with you, to become open with another person, is in fact to create a world of freedom that we can live in. So that the more I conceal from myself, the more, as you put it earlier, the more enslaved I am to your opinion or enslaved I am to the world, whereas the more open I can be with myself and with you and with the other person, the more freedom there is. So that's what I'm after. I'm after a life in which I live freedom. And by the way, when we talked about the book Enlightenment ain't what it's cracked up to be, the key term in this book, I think, other than the word enlightenment, the key term in the book is openness and freedom. I think that when we can be open with another human being, with ourselves, I think we are freer. And that's what I want. I want a life with that kind of freedom. Don't you?
Yeah. And for me, I think the only way you're going to get that is like my Uncle Raymond used to say, is when people start living and let living, then people can be more open, and then everybody can become more free. But it's going to start with living and let living, I think.
Absolutely. But of course, living and let living assumes that some people are saying you may not do such and so, and you have to do it my way. And I think that's sort of freedom 101.
That's really kind of what is happening in today's world. Is a certain group saying you can't go topless, you can't marry a guy, if you're female, you can't marry. So isn't that really kind of what's happening out there?
But for many people, yeah. But I think I live in the Northeast. I don't see that as much as you do. So it's like in the Northeast, where I live in New York City, and there's people allow each other to do what they want to do because New York City is kind of anonymous that way. There's no sense of there's only one way to be. Whereas I think in a place there's more fundamentalist religion or more sort of control. Sometimes I think this is the difference between rural and urban life. I think in rural life, people have a sense of which how things should go or are supposed to go. Whereas in a big city like New York, where I live, there's no sense that there's a way people should be. It's like you just see too many people on the street that are just so different from one another that sense of control is completely gone. And we're, here in New York, we're just everybody lives their own life and nobody notices. Like,
that makes sense because I'm
coming down the street dressed in a dress and you stop noticing after a while.
That makes sense because I'm right here in Houston, Texas, and that's the South right here in the middle of the big Bible Belt. And the folks in the South, they would be the more dogmatic. In other words, the people in the North are, more open to everything. I think, which
Well, yes and no, and I want to speak up for the conservative way of thinking about things.
Okay.
There is a dogmatism that runs rampant in liberal communities that drives me crazy. And the dogmatism is sort of, everybody has to have their voice in the thing. Everybody has to be treated just the same. Everybody has to be, and I think that the dogmatism there is that if such a person that's saying that hears, Rush Limbaugh, in effect, what the person like this would say is, he really doesn't have a right to say that. He's just so wrong, he should be shut up. So there's a kind of dogmatism that runs around the liberal community, too. It's not like, the Northeast or the liberal community is quite as open-minded as we like to think. But nevertheless, it's a little less overt, a little less aggressive, a little less sort of full of itself, full of its sense that it has the only truth. But it's very much there in both the liberal and the conservative community. So I think you're right that allowing people to live in those lives is a huge deal here, and a huge deal.
So what we're talking about here, that I'm hearing, is a lack of balance in the North and the South both, but in different things.
Yeah. I think both are kind of dogmatic in their way. The conservative Christian is dogmatic. The radical liberal is kind of dogmatic. And both think they have the only way to be, and I think both are unhealthy in that way. So for me, what I'm really interested in is fostering a true openness to my fellow human beings, so that we really learn to hear and love and can really respond to this other person. I mean, one of the things that's interesting in talking to you, and I very much enjoy talking to you guys, but one of the things that's interesting is you are in such a different world than I am. The Houston world, you call yourself redneck, it's not a word I ever use, and I enjoy talking to you because I can sort of sense your sort of sincere humanity coming through, and that's important to me, and that's what I'm after. I'm after meeting whoever and talking with whoever, they can really sort of relate to me as a human being. And that's what I want to do, is I want to help people relate to one another as human beings.
I remember the last time we talked, at the end of the show, 2 or 3 times you mentioned that term redneck, and I hear you mentioning it again. This term must...
it's your word, man.
it must really interest you. It must be unique to you or something.
It is. I don't know anybody else who calls themselves a redneck. So, yeah, you're my only redneck friend, though.
So it would be more normal to you if somebody else was calling me a redneck, but just not me doing it, because it's something that you would think most people would not call themselves?
Yeah, in New York, where I live in the spiritual communities that I sort of haunt, and I'm a university professor. You never heard the term redneck. It just isn't a word we use, because it's like those people over there are, they call themselves rednecks, but it's just not a word that we use. So the fact that you sort of parade it in a way that makes you proud, I think, how cool is this? It's so different from my world, and it's, and you're right. Last time we talked about what exactly does this word communicate? What is a redneck? And so I'm quite fascinated by it. I'm interested in it. But also, if I was to say to you, I'm a yeshiva bacher,
I wouldn't have the foggiest clue what that is.
Right, and a yeshiva bacher means a guy that goes to a Jewish school. He's a yeshiva, that's a Jewish school, and bacher is a boy. So, I'm a yeshiva bacher. You would want to say to me, what exactly are you saying with that word? What does it communicate? Why do you use a word like that? Or if I was to say to you, I'm a Jivan Mukti, which is a Hindu term for who I think I am, again, you're going to want to say to me, well, what the heck is a G-man must be? You know, and it's, why do you call yourself that? So it's yes, I'm quite taken with the term redneck. But also, I don't,
I'd say perplexed would be the term.
I'm sorry?
I'd say you're perplexed.
Yeah, I'm perplexed. I'm curious. I'm very curious how you use it, why you use it, what it means, and all that. Yeah, I'm very perplexed by it. And I'm quite taken with it. You know, as I say, you're the only one I know that brags on being a redneck, and I think that's cool.
What, you never heard of Jeff Foxworthy?
You know, I have heard of Jeff Foxworthy, and I remember he has jokes about you're redneck if, you know, and I think that's hysterical. But, you know, I see that on TV, but I don't.
Well, he's another one that kind of parades that redneck around.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, that's right. And also the cable guy with Larry, somebody.
Right.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, so these are sort of redneck humor, but again, they're making jokes at people's expense. I don't know those people.
Well,
and it's not that I fault anybody for this. It's just, you know, I grew up in the Northeast, and it's just not the way we talk. You know, so, you know, it's also if you were to use the term cowboy, I don't know what a cowboy is in Texas. You know, it's like that word probably means a whole lot of different things to you than to me.
Well, according to Jeff Foxworthy, now a redneck is basically just a person who has absolutely no couth. And I got to tell you, when I was growing up,
and let me say to you that a Shimabaka is somebody that has absolutely no sense of humor.
When I was growing up, I swear to God, not a day went by that I was not told multiple times a day I had no couth because of my crass sense of humor in a conservative environment. They just weren't quite prepared for my humor. Put it to you that way.
You were just an uncouth redneck.
Well, that plus I went around passing gas all ends at all times, and it didn't matter if I was in church or in school.
You're an uncouth redneck that has some loose duodenum.
So I guess in a way I fit Jeff Foxworthy's description, but that wasn't why I did it. I did it because my voice sounds kind of a country yokel, so I thought it would go with the, the name would go with the voice.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing there, and I think this gets back into something quite serious, I think what you're doing there is you're playing with assumption. You know, the assumption is a redneck is not only uncouth, but unthoughtful. And you attempt to be thoughtful in your show, as in my experience with you. And the redneck really doesn't care about spirituality. He just wants to have it done on the back of his pickup truck. You know, whereas I think that's not you. You're kind of playing with redneck. You're playing with, hey, I'm going to sort of kid around that I'm a redneck, but I think you are quite true, despite your protestations, and I think you're very thoughtful, despite your protestations. And I think that you calling yourself a redneck radio man is kind of a way to tease the audience into.
Not, I would say, knowingly tease them, but maybe it could be perceived that way. Yeah. But mostly, you might say that I kind of dabble in spirituality and dabble in redneck at the same time, and I guess that really kind of makes for a unique blend.
Yeah, that's right. And saying yourself you're a redneck spiritual person is already, you're kind of playing with the audience. You're saying, hey, I'm breaking all the rules here.
Yeah. So how can you be both at the same time? I'm creating a new creature.
Yeah. Well, in fact, to say, my book is the same thing. When I called it Enlightenment ain't what it's cracked up to be. Basically, I'm saying, hey, we've got this notion of enlightenment, but just kidding. Or don't, let's don't take it quite so seriously. In fact, I've had quite a number of people, after this book came out, I've had quite a number of people that have either said, oh, you're just so wrong about enlightenment, and not, just saying, well, my guru is perfect. So I get a fair amount of that, but I also get people that say, look, I've invested my whole life in this word enlightenment, and by gum, you're not to say anything bad about it. And it's not like I'm saying enlightenment is bad. I'm just saying it's not what the hype is. So it's in many ways I'm doing a similar kind of thing. I'm taking a word that we've got a lot of associations with, and I'm playing with it, and I'm saying, yes, enlightenment, but no, it's not the perfect life that we all sort of hoped and expected and sort of we're striving for. So I think we're doing something kind of similar. I also would describe myself as a guy that has a tendency to break rules. Whereas I often say to my wife, I've never met a rule I didn't want to break.
You sound a lot like me.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're both sort of in the bond breaking business.
Yeah, well,
or better still, in the assumption challenging business. Let's go that way.
Well, I would say that I'm in that there business, but I call myself making an attempt to be a unique me.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a good job.
And you can't go with the well-beaten path and be a unique you at the same time.
Right, gotcha.
So you kind of have to go against the norm somewhere, or you're going to just be the rest. So
yes, and I think one of the lessons I've learned is that if you go against the norm, if you go against the assumption system, you are placing yourself, intentionally or not, on the margins of a society. So you will never be, or rarely do we find somebody that puts himself so on the margin and sells 8 billion copies to their book, or has a radio show that has, a zillion listeners. Generally, people on the margins remain on the margins, and only a few people know about them. So I think one of the challenges of being idiosyncratic, being the unusual Bryce that you are, one of the challenges is, and always will be, that you'll be your own individual guy. And most people won't really get a sense for who you are because you're not playing the game. And for better and for worse.
Well, I think
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have 8 billion listeners to the show.
Actually, I got probably a following of over about a little over 100 to 150,000 listeners if you accumulate everything at YouTube, my site. There's other sources where people listen, like Daily Motion. It all adds up, in other words. I got a huge following, I guess, for somebody that's off the beaten path.
Well, good for you.
I don't know why I do that. I really don't. But who am I to argue with it either? If it works,
well, I think
leave it alone.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's very cool. But unusual. Most of the people that I know that are like you, in the sense that we're all idiosyncratic. We're all very much ourselves, but unusual. Most people in that boat are sort of not really well understood and remain relatively in the shadows and relatively on the margins. And I think so. For you to have a nice big listenership like that, I think is very unusual, but also very cool.
I think it has to do with the fact that we're going through a time of change. It seems to me, from what I've been watching, today's world, people are going more and more away from religion, more and more into spirituality. If you look at your kids in school today, they used to make fun of kids with long hair. They don't do it anymore. They used to make fun of people that were gay. Now kids go around school openly admitting that they're bisexual, and they got just as many friends as anybody else would have. So it's like we're in a society now where it's starting to be okay to be different, more so than it was when I was a kid, for example.
Yeah, I think that there's a saying in the scientific community that says that scientific revolution happens when the old generation dies off and the people that have the new way to think about science are now the dominant voices. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And that is to say, the people that were very conservative are, getting older and grayer. The Republican Party is known as the party of the graying old men. And I think that eventually that whole approach to things will be replaced by a new generation. What happens to the Republican Party is not for me to say, but I do see this tendency to let go of the stereotypes that you have to be a certain way. I see the young people as having a very different attitude towards it. And yes, it's okay to be, gay or straight or bisexual in school and whatnot. So I think you're right. You're pointing to something in which people really are, that society really is changing. And I think as the generations roll over, I think we'll see this more and more. And I'm hopeful about that. I think my children's generation and my grandchildren's generation, I think
in some way our kids have got the idea right.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and our grandkids will grow up with that, just assuming it's the case. So I think that's better.
They may have a lot of maturing to do in the business world and in life in general. But one thing I see in our kids that I did not see when we were kids is this ability to let go of prejudices.
Yeah.
And to me, that's going to be a big boon to mankind, this generation coming up, being free of prejudice. And when the old prejudice generation dies off, I think there's going to be a noticeable shift in the way people treat each other. but it may be another 50 to 100 years before it gets more pronounced.
Yeah, and I think this is a multi-generational process. So that I think my children grow up, a lot less race conscious than I was. And then their children will grow up, that won't even be an issue for them. And the same is true about homosexuals. My children grow up thinking, well, of course homosexuality is okay. And their children, that won't even be an issue. It'll just be sort of, no one will notice in the same way that you don't notice it,
I think before they really get out of all this here mess, they're going to first have to take a look at the pharmaceutical industry and the mood-altering drugs that's being pumped into kids that's affecting, grown-ups as well, that's affecting the way people act. It's causing depression. It's causing anger, anxiety, and they call themselves treating these conditions while at the same time magnifying these conditions.
Yeah, I think so. And I would also say, in my experience, it's true for children. It's also true for adults. I see quite a number of people so worried about being anxious that they take heavy doses of anti-anxiety drugs or antidepressant drugs. And what I see is I see people that are being deadened inside as a result of that, and that makes me feel really terrible for them, because that's not what these things are after. These things are after making a better life, not just a quieter life, not a life in which all of your emotions are simply subdued. That's awful. So I agree with you. I think some of these mind-altering drugs, though very good for people when they are facing these things. I think the anti-anxiety drugs are amazing. The antidepressant drugs are amazing. But when they get overused, which is very common, then I think things get really messed up, and that just breaks my heart to see it. I have one dear friend, and I won't mention names here, but I have one dear friend that started taking an anti-anxiety drug and took some rather heavy doses of it. This woman is just, it's like to talk to her, it feels like you're talking to an automaton. It's just awful. Her physical stuff is all affected by this. It's just ick. Please, no, let's not do this to one another.
Now, one of the things I'm thinking about also is while they're getting medicated to kind of like put a Band-Aid on their feelings, they're missing the chance to, actually get in touch with their spirit, people to help them get in touch with their spirit, teach them how to cope, how to deal, the importance of their perceptions and how they deal with their perceptions, etc. So what's happening is you got a future of kids that's letting go of prejudices, but they're gaining other kinds of baggage. And I think now would be a good time if somebody could get in there and get to today's young and try to help offer some guidance that would point with less medicine and more coping with your own inner self, in other words.
Yeah, and I think that's precisely what we're doing with the Soul Dance program. As not with young people, but with adults, we're attempting to help people see that confronting your own emotions, identifying your emotions, identifying your thoughts, and allowing them out, you become more alive in the process. And I think that's what I'm after. Because I'm after helping folks become increasingly alive, increasingly aware of what they're feeling, of what they're thinking, of what's really going on in their lives. And when I see people doing these sort of psychoactive drugs in order to dampen their feelings, I think, oh my God, you're just destroying what it is, what makes being human joyous. What I'm interested in is living a full life and being truly alive to what's going on in my life. And so when I see people taking these drugs that are so intense, I just feel like you're missing the point. Let's not deaden ourselves. Let's not take away our emotions, but rather let's learn to use them and to be aware of them and to live them fully and to feel what we feel more fully and completely with less defense about them. So I have very strong feelings about this. I feel like, the Soul Jazz program is designed to help people feel more, not less, be more aware of what they're about, discover more in what they are, what their attitudes are, what their feelings are. So when I see people deadening that, I just want to go, oh, no, let's not. Please, let's not.
All right. I know my son brought a friend of his home to stay with us, and he lived with us for about a year. And we got along great with this kid, and he was a real cheerful kid and always happy and joking and cutting up. And he spent a lot of time in video games, though, but still, overall, a likable fella. And he met a girl online, and we agreed to let him bring her home with him. And she moved to Houston, and them two got together. And she wasn't with this boy 30 days, for I swear to God, he was on antidepressants and on applying for Social Security, using depression as a disability because this girl had convinced him he was depressed.
That's really a shame. I think the word depression and anxiety are so mistaken, like depression is something bad. I want to say depression is one of my best friends. And if we rename it, as opposed to depression, which is very debilitating, I know from personal experience, but if we rename the sort of most common depression as melancholy, I want to say, God, that's right to be melancholy. In many ways, life is melancholy producing, and I don't want to lose that. So when I see people being so afraid of these things, I might say, no, let's feel it more, not less. Let's know what we feel. When things get really out of hand, when melancholy turns into debilitating depression, then I want to say, ooh, yeah, let's see if we can do something about that. But in general, most people's feelings are just feelings. Let's feel it. Let's use them. And the Soul Jazz Online program helps people become more aware that they feel, more alert to what's going on, and more open to who they are and what they're feeling.
So if you know anybody that's dealing with imbalanced emotions, a good place to send them would be to your Soul Jazz Online, where they could get some
yes
help.
And no. If they're real, yes. I've actually thought a lot about this. If they're really, really in trouble, I have a friend that has a real problem with anger, for example. That's I think inappropriate for the Soul Jazz program. It's this is not the program is not designed to help people become that are really in trouble to get themselves back together, because it's a good process and a person like that would take it over. But it's for the normal person, the person that has really explored something of themselves, are aware of something of their own patterns, and are really interested in moving their lives forward in a healthy and alive way, and bringing more and more life into their lives. That's the kind of person I think that's really responding to Soul Jazz. So no, if somebody is deeply, deeply in trouble, I don't think the Soul Jazz program is in. But most people are not in that boat. If somebody feels some melancholy in their lives or some anxiety in their lives and really wants to become more aware of what they're about, or feeling like they're a little cut off from the world, that I think is the kind of person that would be really profiting from the Soul Jazz program. Because most of us, and I think that 98% of people in the world are in that boat. In other words, they could do with a good bit more aliveness and a good bit more vulnerability. But it's not a program
probably true.
In deep trouble. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Now, I was going to say, though, I would personally myself recommend to anybody, if you're never been on medication and you're feeling a little melancholy or depressed or anxiety, that before you jump up and use medicine as a first solution, that you stop and think that, yeah, it can numb your pain from your depression, your anxiety, but while it's at it, it also numbs your joy and your happiness and your desire for life. And it's like vegetating yourself. And how are you going to enjoy anything while you're vegetated? And before you can enjoy life, you're going to have to come off from the pills anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I would also say another thing. It's pointing in the same direction. But I think if somebody's feeling a little down, or if somebody's feeling a little anxious, I think that I want to encourage that person to say, well, really, why am I feeling down? What's going on here? And I would invite people to use their down feelings as an opportunity to learn and discover who they are and what's going on. Generally, I find when people are feeling somewhat melancholy and on a long-term basis, there's something in their past they've never resolved. There's something going on with their marriage they've never really addressed. There's something going on with their work life they haven't really addressed. And it's like, I want to use those feelings that come up as kind of cues. It's like, okay, what's really going on right now? What's going on with me when I'm feeling this way? And for me, that's, I think, where this stuff gets to be fascinating. That I want to be more in tune with my life, understand more what I'm about, go deeper into my feelings and really understand what they're about. And so when somebody takes drugs to keep themselves from feeling much, I want to say, ouch, you're losing so much when you do that. It's like, use your melancholy as an opportunity to say, well, who am I in the middle of this, and why am I feeling this way? So for me, that's the challenge.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I have this little saying that I think I made it up as far as I know. I never heard it come out of anybody else, and that is,
Yeah.
I'd drink a nice big ice cold glass of H2O to that.
Fine, then a glass of H2O back at you.
This is for somebody that don't drink alcohol anymore, obviously. But
well, as somebody that still does drink alcohol, I'll raise my beer glass to you.
Well, I never found anything wrong with drinking. I mean, I was one that was able to hold it. It never affected the way I dealt with my family or myself. But the problem I had with it was when I got ready to quit smoking, and here I am drinking 6 40-ounce bottles of beer a day. You know what it's like to try to quit smoking when you go to take a sip of beer and you want to light that cigarette to go with it?
Oh, you're kidding. So the quitting beer was part of your quitting smoking?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Never heard that before.
Actually, it seemed to help because I put a whole entire carton of cigarettes in the closet and left them there for a whole entire year and never touched them. My brother-in-law, James, come over. He was talking about how he couldn't quit smoking. He was hooked on it. He needed these cancer patches and all of this here stuff. And I walked over to the closet. I pulled out that carton of cigarettes and stuck it in front of him and said, well, for me, what worked was I just quit lighting them.
What I used to say was, I don't care about I'll smoke any cigarette I want, just not the next one.
I like that. That's a new, unique one. Anyone except for the next one. So
it actually worked. It actually worked because I would bum a cigarette from somebody every now and again, and I would hold it in my hand, and I would go through all the motions and blow the air out and whatnot. I just wouldn't like it, and it gave me, I would say, 90% of the satisfaction. Most of it is just like what you do with your hands and sort of like the image of looking up at the ceiling as you're just puffing away. And, it's like this. It's like an activity. I sometimes smoke a pipe. About, 3-4 times a year, I go out on my porch and I smoke a pipe. And that has a lot of the same qualities of smoking cigarettes. It doesn't inhale it, but it has a lot of the same qualities. There's something about just the activity of the whole thing and the kind of ritual you get into and move in a certain way. So, yeah, I'll smoke any cigarette I want, just not the next one.
So did you smoke the next one after the next one?
No, because I never got to the next one.
That would be a little tricky. Well, what you do is you walk up to somebody and you bum a cigarette. Then you ask, do you have another one just for later? And then you smoke the one you bummed.
And you smoke the second one.
And you found a way to get around it. You see what I'm saying?
Well, fortunately, Royce, I'm not as clever as you. I never thought of doing that. So. My little mantras work for me.
Well, I always say if it works for you, then that's what you need to do.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me. I stopped smoking when I was probably 26, and I've never gone back. I carry a pipe sometimes, especially when I go on camping trips. There's nothing like sitting around a campfire, smoking a pipe. There's something very satisfying about that. I really love to do that. And I go off on solo retreats, meditation retreats, and I do a 10-day meditation retreat every year. And I'll take my pipe on that because I'm sitting outside. There's no TVs, no radios, and so I sit outside and listen to the birds in the evening time, just before they go to bed, and I go to bed. And I'll sit and smoke a pipe on my little porch there, and I find that very satisfying. But in general, during the course of the year, I don't smoke. But there's a couple times I feel like that's really a sweet thing to do. So far, I haven't killed myself doing it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'd say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was interrupting you. I apologize. I thought you was ending right there. But no, I was going to say I cannot even be around smoke. I start coughing and gagging.
Sure.
But because of my lungs.
Well, you've had trouble with your lungs in a way I haven't.
So, yeah, if I had voting for the lungs, I'm sure I probably still could. I'd notice the smell a lot more, in other words.
Yeah, I noticed the smell. Sometimes I find the smell, especially the pipe, is just so delicious. I think it's great.
But it got that. Some of them has that kind of cherry smell.
Yeah, it looks like there's one that's called cherry tobacco, which is quite popular. Yeah, I like the smell of it. Yeah.
Well, now that we're getting down to about roughly, give or take, 20 minutes, I never like to let a guest get away without first finding out if there's anything else they'd like to share with the listening audience that I didn't think to cover.
Oh, what a sweet question. I think the thing I want to stress, and to some extent we've covered it, but I want to talk about it again. I think the lesson of my life that I've learned, that I want to share with folks, is the power of vulnerability. And I think that becoming vulnerable, and it doesn't mean becoming vulnerable with somebody else like, hey, I think you're being really a schmo about this. It doesn't mean that I become vulnerable in the sense that I tell you what I think of you really, really. But rather become vulnerable with somebody about who I am or what I don't know or where my sense of tender belly is, where my sense of being somewhat unsure of myself comes. I think that's really where life comes alive. And I think what I want to stress is that vulnerability is the key, oddly enough, is the key to being a truly satisfied human being. There's a woman named Brene Brown, who actually is the University of Houston, who's done a lot of research on people that she feels like have a really full heart or a full life. And she defined that in a certain way, which is they're very satisfied with their lives and satisfied with their relationships. And what she found was that people that are especially satisfied with their lives, that feel particularly full in their lives, one thing that held them in common was that they were willing to be vulnerable with themselves and vulnerable with one another, so that they were able to share the stuff that they know, but also the stuff they don't know. Talk about where they are just discovering, or talk about the stuff where they're just learning. And I think if there's one thing that I still am really quite fascinated by and quite taken with is the power of being undefended like that. I think that is probably the greatest bit of wisdom I've ever encountered. That is, the more I can be vulnerable with myself and with others, the more I can tell the real truth with myself and with others, the more fulfilled my life becomes. And that's what Brene Brown was pointing to. But I also think that in my own life and in the Soul Jazz program that we run, that is just an enormous gift. The gift of being honest and the gift of being open. We all feel a little vulnerable sometimes. We all feel a little insecure sometimes. But most of us cover it up most of the time. And I think that's kind of the way our society trains us. But I think the lesson I want to share with folks is that to become more vulnerable is to invite the world into your life. And that allows you to feel more deeply connected and more open. So one of the tricks of being vulnerable is to say to somebody in a way that makes you sound kind of weak, I really miss you. Or another way to be vulnerable is to say, I really am unsure here. Now, there's a time and a place to be vulnerable. There's a time and place to open. Like if I was with, I run a nonprofit, and if I had my employees here, I can share a good bit of where my own vulnerabilities are, but I can't share with them, for example, that I really, really don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm really, really insecure about the decisions I'm making. I can't share with most of my employees that I feel sexually attracted to them because that's inappropriate. But in general, I can share pretty much anything with people that I work with, and pretty much anything that I feel is really true about me. I mean, there are limits to it, as I was saying, but it's just for vulnerability I'm quite taking with. And I think this is really where the power of being a human being really gets accentuated. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can't go on a job and just say, I'm sexually attracted to you without maybe possibly getting arrested for sexual harassment. So, yeah.
That's right. So you don't do that. So you can't say that on the job, and you can't, and if you're feeling vulnerable, like, geez, I'm really attracted to you, you can't say that. Okay. There's limits to what you can say. But
it has to be done within reason, and you have to temper it with wisdom, in other words.
Yeah, you have to temper it with also your society's approach.
It would be okay to, for example, say to somebody at work, if you're not worried about what they think about you, I'm a nudist, for example. Half the people in the room you're talking to may say, I am too, while the other half may look at you like you're going to hell because you sinned. But you're not going to go to jail, is the point.
Yeah, and you can tell them you're a nudist if you don't make a big deal of it. If you say to somebody, I'm a nudist and I insist, or I really want you to come to the beach with me, or come to my house and get naked, it's like that would be inappropriate. But to say I'm a nudist,
your house, you can go back to sexual harassment.
Yeah, right. So you don't do that. So there are limits to what you can say and what you can't say to the people you work with. But I want to be as open and as honest and as vulnerable with people I work with as I can be. It makes life and work much more effective, much more lovely, much more meaningful.
But, I think it's really best, like you say, if you can be open with people as much as you can, because the more you are able to do it, the more free you feel, the less you can just, it's like taking the mask that everybody wears off a little bit at a time.
Yes, that's good. And so I want to take those masks off. I lived too long under a series of masks. And I've had it. I have no interest in that. So I want to be able to say, let's tell the truth here. As much as I can, as much as appropriate. I mean, again, Royce, there's certain kind of times that are appropriate and certain times that aren't. You get on the bus, and the bus driver says, put your money in the bucket there. You want to put your money in the bucket and go sit down. Whereas it would be inappropriate for you to say, I can't put my money in the bucket. I'm really worried about my father, and I'm worried about what he would say. It's like, that driver doesn't want to hear that. This is not an appropriate time for that.
They're like,
but you can say,
that's
thank you
not
very
our
much.
problem.
That's right. That's not our problem. So, so there's a time and a place for this. But nevertheless, I want to have more times and more places.
But yeah, it is nice, however, to be able to know that you can go, you can be in a group of friends and y'all could be bowling or fishing and talking, and you could feel safe to say that you're gay or you're a nudist and without having to worry about what are they going to think about me.
Yeah.
This is something that I think is intrinsically wrong with the world, that you can't do that.
Yeah. And what I want is I want to be increasingly open in the world and increasingly honest in the world. So let me read you a little passage from Enlightenment when it's backed up to me. I haven't read anything from the book.
Okay.
I worked at the writing here. It's someone kind of pleased me. So this is on page 200. No, this is on page 203 of the book. So this is towards the end. Rather than happiness, in the end of the spiritual path, what you get is to become ever more real. You get to stand bent over under the burdens of fewer and fewer of your own lies, with your feet planted ever more deeply into the soil of what is true. You get to become ever more upright, and you get to discover with and to invite others who wish to do the same. What the spiritual path offers, and I can say what the path of becoming a mature human being offers, is not unmingled happiness. I used to think it was unmingled happiness. I used to think what I was really after was a whoopee, kind of a life like that. But that's not what I think I'm after. It's not unmingled happiness, and it's not the conventional. You're a good case study of that. Where you're a very unconventional guy. You become more and more who you are. So we're not looking for the convention, and we're not looking for happy. Nor is it friendship or ease, though these may come. What you get instead is to be increasingly open to the joy and to the melancholy that is the deeply lived life. So speaking of joy and melancholy, that kind of relates back to the thought of let's not use more drugs to get rid of melancholy, but rather let us be open to that melancholy. So what you get instead is to be open to the joy and the melancholy that is the deeply lived life. In the end, you get to be increasingly alive, the mystery that is spirit coursing up your spine. You get to be more awake, more deeply honest, freer, and to stand up straighter and straighter in it. You get to be, in all its ancient simplicity, a human being. So thank you for letting me read that.
Oh, you're welcome. But, you covered something in there that I was, I was saying the same thing, I think, in a more roundabout way, and that's pretty much basically put in short form. If people could be more vulnerable, more free, more open, more honest, a lot of anxiety and depression could probably disappear that's just stemming from that alone.
Yes. Anxiety tends to stem from the fear of letting the truth out. That is my thought about, that's what I really think about anxiety. That I was anxious a lot when I didn't want to say what was really real. I was anxious a lot when I didn't want to tell the real truth. And once I started being able to tell more and more of the truth, my anxieties just began to fade away. Yeah, it's amazing. But I would say depression came for me when I was letting go of my old sense of who I was, but I didn't yet know who my new sense of self is. I didn't yet know who my new self is. And I think depression comes in that sort of space in between the old personality fading away and the new one coming on. So it's like to be vulnerable, to be open, to be honest, I think is really the sort of key cure for these major psychological maladies in this experience.
Well, we have certainly, I think, said a mouthful in this last couple of hours. And, you know, just like the last show, I think this in here has gone very well, and I'm making sure I say this while we're still live on the air. But, yeah, I really enjoy talking to you. While we're still here, if you don't mind, I'm going to put in a little plug for my coming up show Saturday with Ahmed Osman, and he's going to be talking about the lost city of the Exodus, and he talks a little bit about who Moses really was, or who he thinks Moses really was, because, you know, a lot of people say, well, Moses was Moses of the Bible, but not everybody agrees with that, and archaeology hasn't necessarily confirmed that either. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about what his study has showed, and he's actually was born in Egypt. He's in the UK now, but he's actually been to these sites and actually seen the artifacts and the remains of what have you of everything, the pyramid text and all that with his own two eyes. And he understands the language. As a matter of fact, he went and studied it special so he couldn't know what he was studying when he was actually out there looking at it. So you may want to have a listen into what he has to say. I'm putting the link in the chat room now, and I hear the thing interrupting me. So, folks, I want to say goodbye. Join me Saturday at www.talknowradio.net, and we'll talk about that. And this is his link if y'all want to learn more about him. Robert, I want to thank you. You've been a fantastic guest, and I think you and me need to stay in touch.
I agree, Royce, and I have really enjoyed being on this show as the last one. And you're a good man. I really appreciate what you're doing. I'd like to be on the show again if you want. So, thank you.
I think you are too, and I think you need to continue in your work. I think it's needed. You have a good one, and I'm going to call this one a cancel since the music's starting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings.
Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener support.